Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Winter, and I'm bringing you an analysis and feedback on the upcoming balance patch on May 3rd, today, as I'm making this video. And, of course, we have a community feedback update as well, as we usually have on Tuesdays. I'm going to start making weekly videos like this. Give me some feedback on the style, but without further ado, let's jump right into it. I'm not going to talk forever. Okay, we've got some balance changes coming up. A couple for, at least some for each race. Not major changes overall. They range from insignificant to relatively game-changing, but nothing that really breaks anything. Just to break it down, just summary TLDR at the start, mini buff to Protoss, change/minor nerf to Terran, and I'm not sure what's happening with Zerg. I'm going to have to watch that play out. But let's get into the details. Protoss, Photon Cannon. The damage of the Photon Cannon is increased damage to 20 plus 10 versus bio air units. So the only bio air units, Overlords, Overseers, Corruptors, and of course Mutalisks. So what this is going to do is more damage to Zerg air units. That's it. Blizzard recently talked about in their community feedback that they want to see more variety than Stargate openers at the top level of Starcraft 2. Now, the criticism I have here is when you combine it with the Zerg changes, you'll see the Zerg changes are just the Swarm Host, so it doesn't really affect the current metagame, which is Ling Baneling and Hydralisk timings, and then going into Lurkers, and then eventually Broodlords. The reason why Protoss players open up with Stargate is to just both deny the early Overlord drops and scouting and all of that is very common, as well as force out a Hydralisk-based unit composition on top of preventing Mutalisks. The Stargate, especially the Phoenixes, just does a ton in that sense. So this change, it's talked about in the feedback, so I'm not going to go too far in depth into it, but this change does nothing. It's up just straight up buff Protoss. It doesn't really encourage people. Like, the benefits of Stargate are still there, so I don't really see this change encouraging anyone to build anything but the Stargate in the vast majority of pro games still. But that's actually covered in the community feedback, so I'm not going to rip into that too much. Overall, not really going to affect the metagame that much. We're still going to see very similar unit compositions, if at least in the near future. Okay, now some pretty big ones for Terran. The Thor, the anti-air attack is changed from splash to single target. This means you're no longer going to be able to target a big clump of Mutalisks, but you're going to do a lot of damage to a single target. It's 35 plus 15 armored, which is significantly more than the attack did before. Of course, it had splash, but the reason for this is also tying in with the Liberator. The Liberator does a lot of splash damage to air, and there was no reason to make Thors. You're not making Thors because you can just make Liberators. Why would you make a Thor, which costs a ton of money, and you have to build factories when you could just make Liberators? Because they also do a ton of anti-ground damage, kind of like a Thor, but they can fly. So I'm trying to kind of find a new role for the Thor. Blizzard has been talking about making mech a little bit more of a viable option and seeing a little bit more variety in unit compositions, and the big things with this change that will help out the Thor with mech are compositions like Broodlords. Broodlords are armored units, so they will be able to be targeted down by the Thor a lot more effectively. Usually don't have like 12 Broodlords stacked up, so you're doing single target damage. Tempests are another one. I'm not sure how much we're going to see Thors against Tempests. I mean, things like other Terran units like Medivacs and Vikings are also going to take a lot more damage, so I don't really play mech. I'm going to be honest. I don't know how this is going to affect things. I didn't really see the Thor as being... Well, this kind of combines into the next change. Let's talk about the next change and then see how they come together. The Liberator change, anti-air damage changed from 4 with plus 3 to light to 4 with plus 3 to light. Before it did 7 to everything, which means bunch of Corruptors, make some Liberators. Bunch of Phoenixes, make some Liberators. Bunch of Liberators, make some Liberators. Like, a lot of the time, that is what we were seeing. The idea here is, don't just make Liberators. Everybody at every level knows how annoying Liberators are, even Terran players. Admit it. So what we're seeing here is Blizzard trying to kind of force variety, and doing that by nerfing the Liberator. That's a straight nerf to the Liberator. The Liberator is not as good as it was. And changing the Thor. I don't know if I would call that a nerf or a buff, but it's partly to replace the anti-air damage that the Liberator used to do against armor units. So, the matchup I see this affecting the most is TVZ, because you're going to see the Thor being a little bit more useful against Broodlord compositions and kind of more required as well, because the Liberator itself not going to cut it so much against Corruptors, and Zerg players everywhere are rejoicing that you can actually make Corruptors against Liberators again, instead of having them all just die all the time. So, personal opinion here, not objective, personal opinion, the Sky Terran unit composition is one of the most annoying goddamn things to happen in Legacy of the Void. I'm not saying it's imbalanced, I'm just saying it's annoying as all hell to deal with. So this is going to force a little bit more variety out of that. And personally, especially as a Zerg player a lot of the time, I'm happy. I wasn't a really big fan. You know what? I want to see more Thors too. I think this is overall, it is a nerf. This is overall a nerf to Terran. Not a major one. And it's barely going to affect TVP at the moment. And it could have a little bit of an interesting dynamic in TVT. I'm not sure. I mean, we're probably still just going to see Marine Tank with tank drops, so I don't really see a big difference. I think TVZ is the only matchup that's majorly affected here, and it is a nerf to Terran a bit, in my opinion. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Alright, and the most, just a straight-up change. The Swarm Host, of course, you guys remember the Swarm Host, rest in peace, from Heart of the Swarm. Yeah, they still exist. Now, 200, 100, 150, 75, but the supply cost increased from 3 to 4. So this means you can make less Swarm Hosts overall, but they're cheaper. What I see this being used as is kind of almost a one-and-done harass unit. Because 4 supply, like, you can't build an army out of 4 supply Swarm Hosts. It's not reliable. But I see, like, maybe you send in a drop with a couple Swarm Hosts in a couple different locations to pop out the Locust. It's a little bit cheaper. Losing the Swarm Host won't matter as much, so maybe we'll see players playing a little bit riskier or using them for just a wave of Locusts, and then after that wave of Locusts takes out a siege line or something like that, or forces an unsiege, you remax on another wave of Roaches. 150-75 is cheap enough that you can throw away these units without thinking too much about it. The supply change means I think it's going to be pigeonholed into a harass unit. Like, you don't want to make more than maybe 5 to, and on the outside, like 8 Swarm Hosts, because that's just a ton of supply to be using on unreliable damage. But overall, honestly, I'm not sure which matchups that, I'm thinking maybe, honestly, ZVZ on some maps in the later games, Swarm Hosts are actually pretty useful. Because on some maps you see the Lurker Turtle type of deal. It's not that common. ZVP, it could actually be, Zerg versus Protoss, it could actually be, I don't know. I'll play around with it on stream. Hopefully you'll see some highlight games here on the channel. Honestly, I don't know, I don't know if this is going to make Swarm Hosts more used or less used in pro games, but people are going to play around with it, so at least we'll see it for a few days, right? So overall, on these changes, the cannon change, on the pro level, I'm kind of confused because they recently talked about how Protoss just had that one-and-done unit composition. That's kind of encouraging the same thing. It's encouraging more of the same is the simple version. For Terran, slight nerf to TVZ and a change. We're going to see, it's going to force diversity in unit compositions. I don't think it's going to affect the other matchups that drastically. Maybe a bit of TVT because sometimes you see early Liberators. And sometimes you see Liberators used as anti-ground when there's some sort of turtle. But so it's a buff, minor buff to Protoss, only in PvZ against Mutalisk, which is on the other side of nerf to Zerg. A change to Terran, which I would say is a definite nerf in TvZ, at least as it currently stands. And for Zerg, I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm honestly, like, who knows? As a Grandmaster Zerg player, I have no idea. I don't know what's going to happen with that. We'll see. But My overall, I like what they're trying to do, besides the canon change, but they talk about that. It'll be interesting. I'm not saying, like, these were good changes, but I'm not saying they're going to break anything, and they definitely will force variety, and that's always good. So, all right, let's go to community feedback update. They talk about, they're just talking about all the fluffy stuff. You guys, I will put the link to both of these in the info below. Protoss buff versus Mutalisks. Even though Mutalisks are clearly not an issue at the top of the pro level, we believed it was a heavy community issue. So apparently they're saying lower level players were complaining about Mutalisks. And since Mutalisks are barely used in pro games, they buffed the cannon. So what they were doing is one of the few times they've ever made a change just for lower levels. They didn't actually specify this beforehand, but now that I think about it like that, I'm almost okay with it. But this is one of the few times they've ever, like, specifically said, this is not for pro games, this is for everybody else. So Protoss players, don't worry, you don't have to multitask as much, is what they're saying. Other changes, more straightforward. Communication improvements. I don't know where they're getting their info. If they're reading the BattleNet forums, I really do feel sorry for their secondhand cancer. But that's okay. It's not my job to read the BattleNet forums. I know I never do, except for these posts. But yeah, the balanced test maps. That's a complaint I share. Is that we see a ton of balanced test maps with proposed changes, and then the changes just don't happen. At one point we had like 4 balanced test maps in a row with no balanced patches, so it's like, why are we even playing the balance? Now I'm gonna be honest, like, there were not very many that I know of high-level players regularly playing a balanced test map, especially after the changes are just continually not implemented. But if it seems like there's gonna be like a patch every couple weeks with 1 or 2 changes from a balanced test map that was relatively recent, I would be motivated to play more games on those maps. I would do that. But as it stands, it's now almost feels like a little bit of a gimmick. So I do agree with this. And, of course, people get confused on the internet. But I've never really had a problem with understanding why they're doing things. They might be a little bit long-winded some of the time in explaining it, but I've gotten why. I haven't necessarily agreed with the why, but I never thought that was a major issue, but I like that they're trying to be a little bit more concise and causing less confusion overall. And the next balance patch is going to be in about 2 or 3 weeks. About 3 weeks. So, alright. Protoss Colossus. Wait. The issues we're currently working through. Potential immortal nerfs. Yeah, finally. That is the one that would change PvZ to have a lot more variety. Heavy potential Colossus buffs. Honestly, why not nerf the immortal, buff the Colossus? I'd love to see something that made... Well, I wouldn't want to... I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I haven't thought about that at all. And Cyclone changes. That would definitely be interesting. The Cyclone is a unit that has fallen in and out of, like, niche use. Niche? Do you say, like, niche? Niche? I don't know. But that's one I look forward to. So overall, interesting that they've made a change for lower-level players. The changes in the patch, they are pretty straightforward past that, I do agree. But overall, I'm glad they're saying they want to improve communication. And in the weeks that follow, make sure to subscribe here. And we'll find out if that is true, because I get so many questions on stream, and even in videos. What do you think of the newest patch? Well, those are my thoughts on the newest patch as a random player, and specifically as a Zerg player as well, which is my best race. Hopefully, you guys found it informative, and gave you a little bit more of a scope on the idea. Thank you guys for watching. Give me some feedback. Check out the patch on stream. And thank you guys for watching. Good luck. Have fun. Happy StarCrafting. See you next time.